Hi, I'm Mary Polchaninoff, and welcome to Shore Things. When I first decided to do a show, one of my main goals was to think about the resources on the shoreline. We have so many amazing things that we owe to our life here on the shoreline. And I was fortunate to come across my next, the resource we're going to talk about today. I'd like to welcome my guest, who's author of the E-List, Erica Tannen. Hello, Erica.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I am so excited that you're here. And as I said, when I think of resources, I love your go-to publication because there is so much there that is available. I wanted to start by letting our viewers know a bit about your background and how you actually came into doing this publication.
Sure. It's a little convoluted. I have always been in retail at various levels. It was fashion retail, and I had always really wanted to write. It was part of my sort of life goal to write. And I took a couple of writing classes. I took a break from what I was doing and took a couple of writing classes and had this book idea in my head and was really writing myself in circles. I wasn't getting anywhere. And while I had the clothing stores, one thing I noticed was that it was very difficult to reach the customer that we were trying to attain because we had to advertise in all of these little publications. And it was very expensive because if we wanted to be in the Guilford Courier and everything down the shoreline, and people I think on the shoreline are very used to traveling for what they want. Yeah. And I felt like we were offering something special, but it was difficult to get the word out. So at that time, this is 2008, I was one of the first bloggers. I feel like I was one of the first bloggers. I've been around for so long. I had this idea that if I published sort of a guide to the shoreline and what was cool and happening on the shoreline, that eventually I would attract advertisers who were interested in this demographic that I was trying to reach, and that it could be a monetizing strategy for it. And I sort of came up with the idea and very quickly put together a rudimentary website, learned a little bit about how to publish a newsletter and email platforms. And I just got going and started writing about what I thought was great on the shoreline. And I sent it out to 200 of my friends who then sent it out to their friends. Oh, yeah. And very quickly, it grew into maybe 1,000 readers in the first couple of months. And then I knew that it was I couldn't attract advertisers at that point. I didn't have enough of a readership, but I knew that there was an interest in this kind of information.
Yeah. So when you mentioned, just going back a bit, when you mentioned your earlier experience in fashion and retail, were you a personal shopper or were you working in retail? What was your...
I had a very long history. I owned my own stores starting at a very young age. I worked at the vice presidential level for several small regional chain stores in New England. And I was a buyer, merchandise manager. And in a way, it's very interesting because the editorial aspect of buying and choosing things for people really related to what I was doing with the E-List, even though it sounds like a complete pivot from my original career. I mean, I really had a very long career in the fashion industry. And so in a way, it wasn't that much of a pivot because it still took that editorial eye, I think.
And when you were in the fashion before this, were you always on the shoreline?
No, I started in Northampton, Mass when I was very young, still in college. And then I had stores in Northampton and Boston. And then I worked for two regional chains that were mostly in New England, stores all over New England. And then when I moved here, I had this opportunity to partner with somebody I had worked with, and we opened stores in this area.
Because you had a store, I know I visited your store. Was it Essex or Chester?
I had the store in Chester. It was such a sad thing. I was very excited to get back into, I don't know if I was very excited to get back into fashion, but it's been an abiding interest of mine always, and I can't really drop it because it's what I've always done. And I thought it was a very natural progression as an extension of the E-List. once I had developed a very strong subscriber base, right now we're about 25,000, I felt like the next level of growing the E-list would be selling those people something.
Yeah.
And my idea for the store was very much an online store. It was e-com. I felt it used all my skills. I sort of fell in love with the real estate, this beautiful building in Chester. And the interesting thing about it is that it really did not, people wanted to shop in the store. So the store was a very little store that I was opening sort of as like, yes, you could shop in it, but it was also going to be the warehouse for the online sales. And so I sort of thought it was just going to be this very little thing, just a little outlet. And it turned into something else because people really, at least the customer that I was dealing with, wanted to shop in the store, which of course involved more staffing, more procedures, more policies, and a lot of the things that I actually didn't like about retail. So I was very excited about the online platform and less excited about the brick and mortar. And it turned into much more of a brick and mortar experience. Unfortunately, we'd only been open a year when the pandemic hit.
Oh.
And it was very depressing because we were just getting started. We got off to a racing start. Things were going very well. The pandemic hit. We had just reopened for spring with a full store of beautiful spring clothes. We closed, and I had to decide in April. So we closed mid-March when the pandemic hit. And then by April 30th, I had to decide about continuing with my fall orders, which had already been placed. And it was quite a bit of money. And I was thinking, I don't know how long this is going to be. Are people going to want beautiful $300 silk sweaters and $300 cashmere cardigans if they're going to be sitting at home?
Right.
So it was a very difficult decision, but on April 29th, I decided to cancel those fall orders and shutter the store.
Yeah.
I'm glad I did. Actually, in retrospect, I think it was a very good business decision. I would have lost a lot of money.
Yeah. And it was, I'm sorry to hear that you had to close because I had gone in and it was beautiful with 2 floors and it was a beautiful store. And I think just on the shoreline in general, we've talked so much about the pandemic on the show and how it's hit our little shops, because it's like Chester or Essex or deeper, any of our little towns here. The whole flavor of it was to be able to go out and stroll and go in and out of these shops, and the pandemic really hit hard. I was going to ask about your subscription base, and you said you have about 25,000. That's amazing.
Yeah, it took a long time. I mean, I've been at it since 2008. I sort of feel like I'm almost maxed out. I mean, there are definitely pockets of people who don't know about the E-list, because it's really, if you haven't been sent to it by a friend or seen it on social media, I don't advertise in traditional media. So I was sort of feeling when I opened the store maxed out in terms of subscribership. And I think, 25,000, mainly women, is probably, I'm probably at the peak of what I'm going to attain.
I wondered about that too. So I wondered, you have the E-list, which the publication, which is wonderful, because I always love reading your bit in the beginning, and then reading about all the things that are available, and then the fact that there's a calendar there to see what's going on, which is wonderful. But I wonder too about this other social media, if you do Facebook or if you do Twitter or Insta, like a lot of stores now are doing Instagram. Do you see yourself projecting into any of those other mediums?
I'm certainly on all the platforms. I almost never use Twitter. I've been on it since the beginning. It just doesn't, I don't know. I do use Instagram. I have a very large Facebook following, about 10,000. Oh, wow. Fewer on Instagram just because it's a newer platform. I guess for me, the important thing is I have very close relationships with my advertisers. And because the E-list is a free publication, I need those advertisers to continue to publish. There are a lot of costs associated with doing something like this. I think people feel like, oh, it's a blog, there's no cost, but even sending out the newsletter to 25,000 people every week has a very high cost. And certainly keeping up my website, which is the resource, and where I archive all of the information on my newsletter. So what I try to do to provide value to my advertisers, who I'm very picky about. I don't just let anyone advertise. I really feel like it has to go well with my demographic. I want the advertising to be as interesting really as my editorial. So I prefer to keep I love to keep my readers on my newsletter. So I try to pique their interest with social media so that they'll arrive at my newsletter.
Okay.
But it's not, when I had the store, it was a very important thing because selling on Instagram and Facebook is important. But I use it more as a funnel to my email base.
Okay, so it sounds like I didn't realize you had such a big following on Facebook. So I'll have to check that out because I hadn't seen that. So I could see where that is your base, really, the Facebook and the E-list, which. So it's interesting. I don't know a lot about that. Would you consider the E-list a blog or a newsletter, or is it both?
Well, I mean, I started as a newsletter for sure.
Yeah.
But I would need to archive this information somewhere. So, for example, if you had read the newsletter and said, "Oh yeah, that restaurant that she just wrote about, where is it?" that you could then find it on my blog. So yes, I consider myself a blogger. That's what I do.
Right.
But most people who are bloggers, I think, also consider themselves personal bloggers. It's more about them. Yeah. Mine is really about businesses and people I think should be exposed to my readership on the shoreline.
Right.
I have that intro, which is usually about me or something that I'm doing or, just sort of what's going on in the world. But our articles, 3 to 5 every week, are usually highlighting something that we think is fantastic that our readership should know about on the shoreline.
Yeah.
So in that way, it's a little bit different than a blog.
Right. So it is a bit of both. And I know I mentioned it before, but I love your intro because you're right. That is a connection to what's going on in your life and your family. And I think it's always helps us relate as we go along to it. And so
it's funny because the most email I get from my readership is always about that. Right. That is my connection to the reader.
Yes.
For sure. That they feel like they know me, that we have a relationship, that they sort of want to know what's going on in my life and what I'm thinking about. That has developed over time. And it's very interesting because I have certain readers who write to me all the time. I've never met them, but we actually have an online relationship. And when I started it, the idea was to develop an online community of like-minded people who would enjoy the kinds of things that I enjoy, the same kinds of restaurants and clothing stores and museum shows and, sort of have a similar aesthetic, maybe, I guess is the best way to explain it. And so to that extent, I feel like developed an online community.
Yeah, I certainly think so. When I read it, I look forward to that section too. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about the E-list and what you can find on there. Be right back.
Think you're safe in your COVID bubble, huh? Let's say you go to your neighbors. That's okay, right? They're in your bubble. But they go to work and have a coworker who doesn't wear a mask properly. And that coworker has a family and grown children who also go to work. That's just your neighbor. That doesn't include your neighbor's neighbors or your sister, your best friend, or even your dad. We'd hate to burst your bubble, but you don't have one. So remember the basics to stop the spread. Stay home if you can, wear your mask, wash your hands, and keep your distance. That's the best way to stay safe and healthy.
Hey, let's check out this park. Oh, wow, that's really cool. To find a great local park or forest near you, go to discovertheforest.org.
Welcome back to Sure Things. My guest today is Erica Tannen, the author of the E-list. Welcome back, Erica.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so we were talking a bit about your introduction of the publication of your e-list, and we talk about that connection to the reader, which is wonderful. And you had mentioned earlier in the show that you're very picky about the advertisers, and I noticed you have a variety. But I'm curious, do you get a lot of other requests from people that would like to have a space on your publication?
Well, I think that, it's something that I have to say we've struggled with over the years. Right now, our advertising, because of the pandemic, we've lost a lot of our base, because they're simply not in business. Goodspeed, the Kate, until the big tourist venues come back, we're sort of treading water, So we have brought in some smaller advertisers to take up some of that space, but it's sort of a dance every time. We try not to have too many of the same kind of advertisers. For example, we try not to have on the same list too many people who are offering medical aesthetics, for example.
Yeah.
That is a big, very appealing to my customer base, to my subscriber base, but it doesn't make sense to have too many ads of that particular industry. Yeah. So we limit the number of ads that we'll take from that industry. We limit the number of ads that we'll take, for example, for real estate agents, because you don't want to look at my list and just see, 6 houses. Yeah. So it's interesting because, it's another thing where I feel like I bring my editorial skills to the ball game here, because I think it's really important. I've always felt like it's really important to gear the advertising to this subscriber, and the advertising does not work if the subscriber is not interested. So it's a win-win for both the advertiser and for the e-list. Sure. If it's a simpatico relationship. Sure. So it's become very important how we actually structure our ads.
Sure. So looking at the other side of that, have you gotten ideas or information from your readers that would write into you and say, what about this, as far as a direction goes, that's added to your publication?
Oh, absolutely. We get so many. I used to just drive around the shoreline looking for new things, but we get so much of our content from readers who say, oh, I found this great thing, or I'm doing this great thing. And it's always a little bit uncomfortable because some things I say no to, just because I don't feel like it's a good fit. And I never feel good about having to say no to somebody, either somebody editorially or an advertiser. Yeah. But if it's not a good fit, and, one aspect of the e-list that people probably don't realize is it's very data driven. So when I started, for example, I write a lot about food now. I never thought I'd be a food writer. It wasn't like something that I normally wrote about. I have a very deep interest in food, and I love good food, and I love going to restaurants. But I noticed that my readers clicked on that kind of content very heavily. Okay. So I geared more and more of my content to what the readers actually wanted. And that's how I grew the list to 25,000. It wasn't just like, oh, everybody just wanted to read whatever I wrote about. I geared the content to what the reader was actually clicking the most on. And so we try to, it's hard because there aren't that many new restaurants, but we try to include a lot of food information. Yeah. We try to include a lot of things to do. That's why the event calendar came about. That was an addition maybe probably 8 to 10 years ago. So really, the whole e-list has been driven by what this audience really enjoys reading about.
I didn't realize you were actually looking at the metrics on what we're looking at when we're clicking away. So you get that data and you can look at that to make your decisions.
All about the data. Yeah, it's sort of what I did in my last world. It was all data driven. And that's part of why I continue to find this so interesting and fascinating, because it satisfies my desire to write, and it also satisfies my desire to play with the numbers.
Yeah. So how much time do you need? So this is your writing outlet, and it comes out once a week, right, Erica? Once a week?
Yes. We have a hard deadline. 5:45 in the morning. We publish on Tuesday.
Okay. So
and that's a really hard deadline. We have done it. I think in 12 or 13 years, maybe 3 times we were unable to publish because of environmental factors like losing Wi-Fi or a big storm.
And when you say we, Erica, who else works with you?
Well, before the pandemic, I had a team of about 5. I had an advertising salesperson. I had somebody who just did the events calendar. And then I had my right-hand person, Laura Williams, who's been with me almost since the beginning, off and on. And she is, she does all the production, you know, so she'll resize photographs, she'll fix photographs. She now does some of the writing. She's really, I couldn't do it without her. At this point, I really couldn't do it without her. And right now it's just me and Laura until things pick up again. I think that's the way it's going to be for a while. And that's your team. Well, what I like about it too is there's the variety. You know, whether there's something happening at an art museum or a musical production or some benefit, that I like the fact that it's a wide range. And I know you mentioned that you're doing a lot more with food because that's what people are clicking on. Would you say that's the biggest change you've noticed in your readers' interest since everybody's sitting at home now and we're in the pandemic? I think what they're really interested in, yeah, they're interested in takeout. Yeah. For sure they're interested in and other sort of options for food, like besides takeout, dinner deliveries. They are interested, especially before it got really cold, at what sort of, you know, at the outdoor venues, things to do that were outdoors. It's really been difficult to come up with content that is really valuable to our readers right now because, frankly, there's not that much going on. And the funny thing is, you know, people always thought of the shoreline as sort of sleepy, but then they read my list. And even my friends who live far from here who tend to read my list, like I have friends, just personal friends of mine, they're like, oh my God, it's so exciting where you live. There's so much going on. And it's funny because I'm sort of like, there is? Okay. But if you think about summertime, especially around here, when all the theaters are in full, you know, have a really robust schedule, and when all the outdoor dining is happening, you know, our big season goes. We usually don't publish much in January, but our big season is certainly from like April through October.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine a lot of that was on food, and I don't know, do you also post things that might be on Zoom, whether it was cooking classes or anything like that that are virtual these days? Was that part of it as well?
We did a lot of virtual calendar listings and really pushed, especially at the beginning, opportunities to do things at home, you know, like art classes, cooking classes, certainly all the yoga studios that were really heavily trying to build their business online. So there was that kind of content. I've almost forgotten because it seems like this pandemic has been going on forever. But at the very beginning, we pivoted to a resource really for what you could do at home, what was going on that you could do at home.
Looking ahead, Erica, do you have any other goals, any other adjustments or goals that you have for the future for the E-List?
Well, you know, I do. I really hope that we can build it back up once we gain those bigger advertisers back, and not have it just be me and Laura, because it's a lot of work for 2 people to do every single week. There's so much, you know, we really make such an effort, I think, to make all of our editorial content good and interesting and fun to read. We try to make our pictures really good, which is something that we've improved on over the years. If I go back to the first E-List and I look at my photographs, I'm like, oh my, they were terrible. And we've also sort of prided ourselves on the fact that we're not photographers, and we have always used an iPhone. I mean, we've never used a real camera. So I don't have any big plans right now, which is sort of interesting because I've always had, you know, here's the next thing for the E-List. I think it'll be really fun eventually to get back to our events. Our events were a very big part of the E-List and another way of really developing that online community.
Yeah.
We did all the girls' nights out in the towns, which were equally good for the women who came, and all of the retail stores who participated. Our Insane and Sidewalk sale, which I don't know if you know about, but we do that every January, and that we'd have 1,500 people show up at those events. So I'm hoping, you know, that one day we're going to be able to all be together again. And I hope to launch events like that. If not, we have talked about doing sort of online events that might be interesting, but I like the in-person, you know, I get to meet all my readers. It's so much fun.
It does help build the community. I've been to a few, and it is fun. And I love that you even had men's nights out, not just the women's nights out. So that was very beneficial.
Going. We'll try anything, and especially since we have enough of a reader base that these events almost always draw enough people, always do draw enough people to make it valuable for the retailers that are involved also.
Well, I want to thank you again, Erica, for coming on, but I want to thank you too for being such a great resource with events happening all over the shoreline and the calendar for those of us that dream of days when we can get back out and enjoy being together again. And of course, I wish you the best as it expands and things open up, we hope, which should be soon, we hope. So thanks again, and I hope all goes well and that we have a lot more to fill up that calendar.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Till we see you again, stay tuned for Sure Things.